Sometimes, to admit true love, a person needs an entire lifetime. This saying is perhaps truer than ever for King Charles III, a man who has spent nearly his entire life in the immense shadow of the crown, duty, and expectations. At 76, when most people choose to rest and reflect on their lives in peace, he, the King of England, chose to break a silence that had lasted decades. And the words he spoke not only shook Buckingham Palace, but left the entire nation stunned. And she is the love of my life. Just 7 words. But they carried an undercurrent that swept through those who once adored Princess Diana and those who doubted the relationship between the king and the woman who stood on the sidelines of the royal family for decades, Camilla. People may argue about politics, power, or even the monarchy itself. But there is one thing that, whether you are a commoner or royalty, you cannot escape love. Love, with all its bright and dark sides, has been the source of wars, partings, and also the reason people endure, wait, and forgive. For over 7 decades, Charles has lived on the fragile line between duty and emotion. As the heir from the age of 4, he grew up unlike other children, every gesture, every glance carefully measured. For decades, he was Prince Charles, the man who always stood behind his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and before a barrage of expectations for the perfection a future king should embody. But behind that calm demeanor was a heart that once fluttered, once stirred, and once ached. His relationship with Princess Diana was once seen as a symbol of a modern fairy tale, a lavish wedding, lovely children, smiles for the cameras. But backstage were silent cracks, irreconcilable differences, and hearts that couldn't find harmony. Meanwhile, the name Camilla Parker Bowles lingered like a faint mist, never fully fading from Charles's story. Not dazzling, not glamorous, but always present like a reminder that true love doesn't need the spotlight, but requires patience and faith. At 76, after a lifetime as a husband, father, and now king, Charles finally said what he had kept to himself. Not in an official speech, not at a royal celebration, but in a private conversation, when he looked back on his life and admitted something not easy to say. I have loved her from the first day, and I have never stopped loving her, not even for a single day. The love story of a king may no longer be what people expect in an era of modernization and booming media, but it is this simple truth that gives this story an unbelievable weight. For it is not just a belated confession, but a journey to rediscover himself in love and in the emotional freedom he sacrificed his entire life to preserve. So, who is this woman? The love Charles calls the only one. Is it Camilla, or another shadow from the past he cannot let go of? Join us as we trace this journey, a journey from stolen glances at royal gatherings to harsh media rumors, and finally to a simple confession that shook all of England. Because true love, sometimes it's not about the moment it begins, but the courage to speak it when it's already too late. On July 29, 1981, England and the world witnessed a royal wedding likened to a fairy tale. Prince Charles, heir to the throne, married the young, beautiful, innocent, and charming mighty Diana Spencer. In a white wedding dress with a nearly 7-meter train, Diana entered St. Paul's Cathedral amid ringing bells and the admiring gazes of millions. It was not just a grand ceremony, but an iconic moment marking the start of a new chapter for the British royal family. But beneath the lavish wedding dress and the flood of congratulations lay a truth few recognized: that marriage began with invisible gaps that gradually engulfed it. Diana was only 19 at the time, too young, too dreamy, and never prepared to become the center of global media attention. Meanwhile, Charles was 32, a mature man, raised in the royal mold, bound by duty, responsibility, and a web of complex relationships within the aristocracy. One of them, and the one no one wanted to mention, was Camilla Parker Bowles. Even from the early days of their engagement, Diana sensed something was amiss. In a later interview, she once said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." That half-joking, half-serious remark turned out to be a bitter truth because Camilla never fully left Charles's life. The age gap, differing lifestyles, and especially the emotional distance, quickly drove Charles and Diana apart. Diana was intensely emotional, craving love and connection. Charles, raised in the cold environment of royalty, didn't know how to express affection, let alone understand the growing loneliness in his wife's heart. Diana became a global icon, beautiful, charismatic, approachable, and compassionate. But behind those radiant smiles was a woman increasingly lost in her own life. The media adored her. The public worshipped her. But the husband she needed grew ever more distant. Though the wedding of Prince Charles and Princess Diana was hailed as the wedding of the century, beneath its glamorous veneer was a marriage fraught with instability. From the start, the differences were clear. Diana was only 19 when she entered the royal palace, while Charles was 32, mature, experienced, and bound by countless protocols and principles. When Diana needed a husband to share her emotions, Charles acted like an heir fulfilling a duty. As she increasingly captivated the media and became a global focal point for her beauty, approachability, and compassion, Charles felt overshadowed. The gap between them, not just in age but in emotion and purpose, grew ever wider. Diana longed for complete love, while Charles could not let go of the woman he always held in his heart, Camilla Parker Bowles. She lingered like a shadow, silent but ever present. And from that, Diana realized that this marriage was never just between two people. Those cracks widened over the years, bringing wounds that were hard to heal. Both sought to fill their personal voids with outside relationships. And as the truth gradually surfaced before the public, the image of the perfect royal family crumbled. In 1992, they officially separated. In 1996, the divorce was finalized, ending a fairy tale filled with tears. Then, just a year later, the world was stunned by the news Diana died in a car accident in Paris. The tragedy spread like an earthquake. England plunged into mourning. A sea of white flowers covered the gates of Kensington Palace, and millions wept. For Charles, it was the greatest shock of his life. Though no longer husband and wife, Diana remained the mother of his two beloved sons, William and Harry. He was the one who had to travel to Paris to bring her body back, on a flight no one wanted to make. The media at the time erupted with criticism of the royal family's coldness, and Charles was thrust into the eye of the storm. But beneath that silence was a smoldering regret, not easily named. Diana's death left an unfillable void not just for the public but for her family. William maintained his mother's composure, while Harry rebelled, hurt, and anxious. For Charles, he didn't just lose his former wife but the chance to mend, to make amends, if only with a sincere apology. Perhaps from that moment, he realized there are things a king can control, but emotions and time are never among them. Camilla Chandler, later Camilla Parker Bowles, was no stranger to Britain's upper crust in the 1970s. Born into a middle-class aristocratic family, not overly prestigious but respectable, Camilla stood out not for dazzling beauty or renowned fame, but for her wit, candor, and ability to put anyone at ease, even in the protocol-laden royal circle. Charles met Camilla for the first time in 1970 at a polo match, a gathering place for the elite. He was just over 20, still a prince unburdened by courtly duties, while Camilla was a confident, open, and captivating young woman. They quickly found a connection, a shared love for nature, horseback riding, art, and endless conversations. Unlike many women who were timid before a prince, Camilla spoke to Charles like an old friend, an ordinary man, and that naturalness made his heart stir. At the time, they shared a deep bond, handwritten letters, clandestine meetings, and quiet companionship gradually formed a love that transcended fleeting romances. But that love was interrupted. The palace would not accept someone like Camilla as the wife of the heir to the throne. She was not a pure aristocrat and had prior romantic relationships unforgivable in the eyes of the royal family at the time. And so, when Charles set off for naval service, a duty lasting months, Camilla married her longtime lover, Andrew Parker Bowles, a decision many believe she was forced into by time and societal pressure. Charles returned, too late and heartbroken. Their romance was severed, but the emotions never faded. Even as he entered marriage with Diana, Camilla remained a presence in Charles's life, not because he deliberately maintained an ambiguous relationship, but because they never truly ended. In a 1994 interview, Charles admitted, "I love Camilla, and I still always cared for her." A rare but profound confession, revealing an emotional bond that never waned. As the relationship between Charles and Diana grew increasingly strained, Camilla, by then separated from her husband, became the one Charles turned to for solace. She didn't demand titles, didn't show jealousy, didn't compete. She simply listened, something Charles always lacked in the stifling world of royalty. Yet, in the public's eyes, Camilla was painted as the other woman, the destroyer of a family's happiness, the villain in Diana's unfinished fairy tale. The media was ruthless, exploiting her private life, even mocking her appearance and character. For decades, Camilla lived in the shadows, avoiding the public, bearing a label steeped in prejudice. She didn't appear at royal events. She didn't give interviews. She didn't speak out to defend herself. She remained silent, and that silence only fueled more suspicion. But after all, Camilla stayed. When Charles divorced Diana, when Diana passed away, when the royal family faced an unprecedented media crisis, she never left, never demanded Charles choose. She waited quietly, almost painfully, for the moment she could step into the light without bowing her head. So why did Charles never forget Camilla? Despite marrying a woman adored by the world, the answer lies not in allure or prestige. It lies in connections, something not everyone is lucky enough to find. To Charles, and Camilla was the one who understood him not as a future king, but as a man full of contradictions, vulnerable, and always lonely in his own world. She didn't need him to be perfect, didn't force him to be a public ideal. Camilla accepted the real Charles, something even he sometimes couldn't do. That love was not as radiant as Diana's no 7-meter wedding dress, no global broadcasts, but it was steady, enduring, and persistent. A love not for display, but for healing. Years later, as the storm subsided, the public began to see Camilla differently. She engaged in charity work, quietly supporting causes like domestic violence, education, and child protection without seeking the spotlight. Gradually, she went from Britain's most hated woman to an accepted figure, if not for love, then for her steadfastness and patience. In 2005, after years of loving in secret, Charles and Camilla officially married. The wedding was simple, unostentatious, not lavish, not broadcasted, but deeply meaningful. A love once forbidden had finally found its path. When Charles ascended the throne in 2022, after Queen Elizabeth II's passing, Camilla was named Queen Consort. A symbolic moment, not just a courtly recognition, but an acknowledgement of a half-century love. And at 76, amid declining health and pressures from both the royal family and the public, Charles uttered a simple yet profound statement: "Camilla is the love of my life." A statement needing no grandeur. After all those years, there was nothing left to prove. That love didn't begin with expectations, wasn't sustained by duty, and wasn't ended by judgments. It simply was real and strong enough to walk together to the end. As the longest-serving heir in British history, Charles was not born to live like an ordinary man. From age 4, he was designated the future king, a role revered by millions, but also a golden cage imprisoning every true emotion. Every step, every word, every choice in his life was meticulously weighed to fit the royal image. Impersonal love, sadly, was not part of that mold. The marriage between Charles and Diana was, in truth, a result of heavily pressured arrangements. Though the public wanted to believe in a fairy tale, those involved knew it was a choice driven by symbolism, politics, and stabilizing the royal image, not entirely rooted in heartfelt connection. Charles was over 30, and the pressure from the royal family, especially from the Queen and Prince Philip, grew heavier. They needed him to settle, marry, and produce heirs to ensure succession. Diana, only 19, was perfect on paper, aristocratic, untainted by scandal, beloved by the public from her first appearance. But between them, two people from different worlds, there was no foundation strong enough for a lasting marriage. Charles hadn't forgotten Camilla, and Diana was too young to fully grasp what she was stepping into. In diaries later excerpted, Charles wrote, "I am marrying a girl I don't truly know, and I'm not sure she knows me. I feel like I'm falling freely, but no one cares." That brief entry said it all: the loneliness, isolation, and being forced to live by others' expectations. In a 1994 interview with journalist Jonathan Dimbleby, Charles first publicly admitted to infidelity when his marriage with Diana was beyond saving. Though this truth drew heavy criticism, it was a rare glimpse into his real self, conflicted, hurt, and needing love like anyone else. In the biography Prince of Wales released that year, Charles confided to the author, "I tried to do everything right. I married the chosen one. I fulfilled my duty, but my heart wasn't there. And I paid for it with years of loneliness." It's no coincidence that Charles became more reserved over time. In the 1980s and 1990s, as Diana became a global icon, Charles faced growing public backlash. He was portrayed as rigid, distant, even callous, especially as the media cast Diana as the perfect victim. But few understood that Charles was also stifled by a role he didn't choose. At many royal events, his eyes were often quiet, sometimes lost amid the cheers for his wife. He wasn't adept at showing emotion, but that didn't mean he didn't feel. On the contrary, he often chose to record his moods in diaries or turn to painting and classical music, private spaces where he could be himself, if only briefly. A former aide once recounted, "I once saw him sitting alone by a window, quietly listening to a cello piece at sunset. That was a Charles the public didn't know, a man more vulnerable than they imagined." And amid those contradictions, Camilla remained, not loudly, not vying for attention, not speaking out. But she was the one Charles always returned to like a sanctuary from the pressures of fame and the overwhelming shadow of his marriage to Diana. With Camilla, he wasn't the prince, not the public's figure. He was just Charles, the man who once dreamed of a simple life and being loved like anyone else. Camilla didn't demand he be anyone else. She didn't require him to appear on time for the public, didn't ask for roses every week or media attention. She was just there quietly, patiently, waiting. And that steady presence, over time, became the emotional salvation for a man suffocated by the very crown awaiting. And then, perhaps that's why, after Diana's passing and years of avoiding the public eye, Charles gradually found the courage to stand up for his love. Not to justify it, but to live authentically. That love didn't begin with magic, nor did it end in jubilation. But that's precisely why it was more real than anything else in his life. In a private conversation recently revealed by British media, King Charles at 76 made a confession that seemed belated but deeply sincere. "I loved her from the first time I met her. No matter how many years passed, I never changed that." He didn't need to name her. All of England and perhaps the world knew who he meant. Not Princess Diana, his lawful wife of yesteryear, but Camilla, the woman once called the harshest names by society, the other woman, the royal homewrecker, the shadow in the royal marriage. That confession wasn't made in a televised interview or a speech to the nation, but during an intimate meeting with a group of trusted confidants at Highgrove House, the private residence Charles always saw as a haven amid courtly storms. One attendee recounted that when mentioning Camilla, the king didn't hide his emotion. He paused, took a deep breath, and slowly spoke those words as if drawing them from his very heart. So why did Charles choose this moment at his twilight years? As a reigning monarch, to publicly admit he never stopped loving a woman once shunned by the kingdom. The reason, perhaps, isn't about titles. Camilla is now queen consort. They've been legally married since 2000. The barriers of protocol and the judgmental gazes are gone. But that's exactly why the courage to say those words is no longer about protection or justification. It's a release of final acknowledgement after a lifetime of silence. In Charles's inner world, there has always been an unofficial Charles, the man who loves art, writes diaries, and spends hours by a window watching the sunset. That man isn't always adept at saying "I love you," but he carries emotions never permitted to be shown. And having lived nearly his entire life, he chose to confess not to shock, but to find some peace for himself. That statement spread quickly, without any official channel, but powerful enough to cause a stir. Major outlets like The Guardian, The Times, and the BBC reported in unison King Charles confesses lifelong love for Camilla. Some commentators called it a late but necessary truth. Others saw it as a savvy move to bolster Camilla's position amid a public that hasn't fully embraced her as they did Diana. Public reaction, as usual, was divided. Longtime royal supporters, especially older generations, began showing empathy. On social media, many comments noted, "Even if I don't like Camilla, I'm starting to understand why she matters to him." Camilla's patience from the shadows to the light, without complaint or resistance, forced people to see her differently. But on the other hand, those who revered Diana as the people's princess felt hurt. To them, Charles's admission of lifelong love for Camilla was tantamount to negating Diana's role in his life. On Twitter, posts with the hashtag Justice for Diana resurfaced. Many wrote, if she was the love of his life, why did he marry Diana, or Diana is gone, and he still won't let her be? Within the royal family, reactions were kept under wraps, but everyone knows a king's words are never truly private. Camilla, in appearances afterward, maintained her calm demeanor. She didn't comment, didn't smile more, didn't change her gestures. But in her eyes, according to media observations, was a deeper serenity than ever. Perhaps she knew those words had been held for 50 years and were finally spoken. William Charles's eldest son is said to have offered no official comment, but his inner world must have been stirred. He always adored his mother, keeping a careful distance from Camilla. But now, with his father as king and Camilla as queen, he must balance personal feelings with national duty. For Harry, the younger son, long estranged from the royal family, the reaction was more pronounced. A source close to Harry and Meghan said Harry feels this is the final confirmation that his mother was betrayed from start to finish. Yet, no matter how the public debates, no matter how many times the past is stirred, the truth stands quietly firm. King Charles loved Camilla from the first meeting, and he never wavered. It's not a perfect love, not a fairy tale, but it's a real love, and like all real loves, it doesn't need everyone's approval, only the commitment of those involved to never let go. After marrying Charles, Camilla didn't choose to make loud appearances to assert her position. On the contrary, she stepped back, focusing on work few noticed but held real value. She regularly participated in charitable activities, supporting organizations against domestic violence, improving children's education, and promoting women's rights, especially in disadvantaged communities. No cameras followed, no attention-grabbing speeches, just quiet, consistent presence. Charles, too, continued his patronage of charities, cultural preservation, and environmental causes, values he upheld as prince. But since having Camilla by his side, people noticed he became gentler, more at ease, as if her presence was the peace he always sought. Step by step, Camilla began to earn points in the public's eyes, not through words, but actions. She didn't try to replace Diana or justify the past. She simply did her role well beside Charles, as a true companion, unassuming, undemanding. Media observers once noted Camilla doesn't build her image on sympathy, but on steadfastness. Instead of chasing media waves like some younger royals, she chose a different strategy, living authentically, acting consistently, and letting time speak for itself. And indeed, time proved it. The British public, known for being discerning, began shifting from calling her Mrs. Camilla to Queen Camilla with respect. On social media, posts revisiting her patient journey garnered unexpected empathy. They didn't forget the past, but they understood why she stayed when no one stood by her for years. From the most reviled, seen as a symbol of betrayal, Camilla gradually became an image of resilience, a woman who didn't need the spotlight to affirm herself, only to be in the right place, at the right time, with the right person. Some loves must traverse an entire lifetime, endure loss, prejudice, and time before being acknowledged. The love between Charles and Camilla is such a testament. It didn't start with youthful dreams, nor was it the fairy tale love the public craved. It came from understanding, from silent moments standing together through media storms, from choosing again and again, I will still choose her. One more time and another. At 76, Charles is no longer the young prince living under royal expectations. He is a seasoned man who failed in marriage, lost a wife adored by the world, faced criticism, and knew loneliness to its core. But after all that, he dared to live authentically, not just with the crown, but with his deepest emotions. His recent confession, I loved her from the first time I met her, and I never changed, that is not meant to stir emotions. It's a late serenity. After decades of silence, he finally allowed himself to fully acknowledge that love, without hiding or seeking anyone's permission. From Charles's journey, one can draw a lesson: being loved is fortunate, but loving rightly, the right person, requires courage. Sometimes the right love comes at the wrong time. And sometimes to have what you truly need, you must trade a lifetime of living by expectations. Not everyone gets the chance to correct youthful mistakes. Not everyone is lucky enough to have the person they love still there, waiting, patient, and asking for nothing, as Camilla did. But if you do, and if your heart is strong enough to return to the truth, then perhaps it's never too late. Charles is not a perfect king, but perhaps that's why he is a real human. And the love he preserved for half a century, though not grand, not flawless, became one of the most authentic, emotional legacies the British royal family has ever had. I know many won't understand. Charles once said, "But I always knew who my heart belonged to." A seemingly gentle statement, but it carries a lifetime of struggle, hurt, and ultimately acceptance. Not everyone has the courage to live authentically, especially when bearing the weight of a crown, duty, and a kingdom's harsh scrutiny. So, what about you? If faced with the choice between living by others' expectations or living true to yourself, what would you choose? Would you dare to hold on to an imperfect love that makes your heart serene? Or would you smile and move on in a role just to please the world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to explore more moving corners behind the royal glamour. Because sometimes the truest things take a lifetime to dare say aloud.